Hello, good evening again, good morning, good afternoon, whatever time it may be for you. It is Miss Mooney coming at you from her home. So, if you haven't checked the previous video for Rocket Boys Chapter 7, we're going to read Chapter 8, Construction of the Cape. And then after this, you are to read Chapters 9, 10, 11, and 12 on your own. And then you've got some short assignments for those. So if you have any questions, please don't hesitate to email me, contact me some way within a reasonable time. Okay? So, excuse me. We are going to get to work. At the other Cape, the one in Florida, business was booming. The Air Force was launching ballistic missiles every week. Most of them blew up spectacularly, but a few wobbled downrange. On February 5th, 1958, the hapless Vanguard team tried again for orbit and failed, although this time their rocket managed to at least clear the gantry before it blew up. On March 17th, they gave it another shot and this time orbited a 3.24-pound satellite, nicknamed Grapefruit. Dr. von Braun launched another 31-pound Explorer into orbit on March 26. It seemed the United States was on the move. Then, in May, the Soviet Union orbited Sputnik 3, weighing in at a whopping 2,925 pounds. Some Americans, the same kind I thought would have deserted at Valley Forge or surrendered after Pearl Harbor, said we might just as well give up on space. Dr. von Braun wasn't giving up, not by a long shot. According to a newspaper report, he was building a huge monster rocket called the Saturn. In the spring of 1958, Congress and the Eisenhower administration set up the National Aeronautics and Space Administration in an attempt to put some order into the space program. I read where Dr. von Braun said he might leave the Army and join NASA. If he did, I knew the new agency was my ultimate goal as well. As my year in the 9th grade at Big Creek dwindled to days, Mr. Turner held one of his few command performances in the school auditorium. We all expected a lecture on school spirit, how we should think about the football team all summer and be ready to cheer them on come fall. Roy Lee and I sat down together. I felt a punch on my shoulder, and I looked around and saw Valentine Carmina grinning back at me. Valentine in the class ahead of me had a figure that was usually described by boys watching her sashay by as stacked as like a brick privy. "Hi, Sonny," she said, her lips parting to show her fine white teeth. For some reason, Valentine had always liked me. If the other boys were off doing something else, and she saw an empty chair beside me in the auditorium in the morning, she'd sometimes ease into it and just talk about things. She came out of Berwind, which was one of the grittiest and roughest towns in the county. She was the oldest of 7 children, and she said had raised all the other kids because her mother was worn out. She'd also had problems with Mr. Turner. The faction she led in the Sub-Deb Girls Club had been admonished to stop wearing low-cut dresses, smoking in the restrooms, and sneaking out to class to smooch with boys in the band instrument storeroom. She had responded by showing up with her dresses hemmed from the bottom and scalloped from the top, threatening, as Mr. Turner lectured her, to meet somewhere in the middle. Valentine gave in on the clothes, at least by keeping her sub-deb jacket on. However artfully unzipped, she could step all masculine traffic down the hall, with boys' knees turning to jelly and necks being wrenched as they jerked around to watch. Sometimes in the hall, she'd sneak up behind me and take my arm and let me walk her to class. It always made me feel proud that she picked me. I'm going to turn this light on. Roy Lee turned almost completely around in his chair. "Oh, Valentine," he crooned. "My sweet Valentine." "Shut up, Roy Lee," she grumped, and then turned her radiant smile back on me. "How you been, honey?" I never quite knew what to say to her. "I'm okay, thanks," I replied mundanely. "How about you?" "Feeling fine," she replied while giving Roy Lee the sly eye. "Only thing make it better if you and me went smooching somewhere." I melted into my chair while Roy Lee gleefully poked my ribs. "Forget Dorothy," he whispered. "Go get yourself some of that." I didn't get a chance to respond. A hush came over the auditorium as Mr. Turner took the stage. He stood behind a lectern, his eyes darting angrily toward the slightest noise. Very quickly, even the most squirmy of us sat as quiet as stones. Then he spoke of two matters, each sufficient to shake the core of our young lives. Big Creek High School, Mr. Turner said in his shrill voice, had been placed on football suspension for the 1958 season. That meant no games would be played. None. The reason for the suspension was this. A group of well-meaning parents, the football fathers, had failed in their suit to force the West Virginia High School Athletic Commission to let Big Creek play in the 1957 state championship game. We all sat in dumb shock. He might as well have announced he was going to burn down the school. There was a groan from the knot of football boys. Coach Gaynor stood up and hushed them. Act like men, he said. Show them what you're made of. Mr. Turner had more to say. Big Creek was to be restructured, he said, beginning with the junior class. A more challenging academic curriculum was to be installed, the result of Sputnik and the worry over how badly educated America's children were compared to Russian kids. Mr. Turner gripped the lectern and looked down on us. There will be no more easy classes at this school, he announced. We had heard two hard things, Mr. Turner said. You can do nothing about the football suspension, he said, looking at the football boys. Accept it and make the best of it. But the changes in the classroom are another matter. He gripped the lectern. After you leave Big Creek, some of you boys will go to work in the coal mines. Some will go into the service, and some, not enough in my opinion, will go to college. You girls will be wives, nurses, teachers, secretaries. Maybe even someday one of you will be the President of the United States. There was a murmur of laughter, quickly smothered by dour looks from the other students. Mr. Turner swept his gaze over us, his expression proud and certain. The newspapers and television say the Russian students are the best in the world, he said. They tell us how intelligent they are, how advanced, and how all the world may have to bow down to them when they take over. Well, I'm here to tell you, Big Creek students have nothing to be ashamed of in front of anybody. Come armed with a wonderful education provided by caring teachers. You come from the best, hardest working people in the world. You come from the toughest state in the Union. The Russians, I pity them. If they knew you like I know you, they'd be shaking in their boots. Our 600 faces gazed up at the little man in rapt attention. Until a football boy stifled a groan, the silence was utter. Mr. Turner looked sharply in the football boy's direction, and Coach Gaynor stood up and looked at him too. The football boys leaned their heads in on the groaner as if in a group prayer. Mr. Turner's eyes left them, went back to the General Assembly. Now about all these new standards, he said. They're not going to be easy to meet. It's not only content. From my analysis of the new curriculum, there's at least twice the amount of material to cover in a school year. That's going to mean a lot of concentrated classroom work, and a lot of homework. You must completely dedicate yourselves to it. To do less will be to let your country down, your state, your parents, your teachers, and ultimately yourselves. Remember this, the only good citizen is the well-educated citizen. Consider this poem by William Ernest Henley, he said, opening a book and adjusting his glasses. Ugh, Worley growled, getting restless. I could sense a stirring in the student body. Mr. Turner had kept our attention until then, but a poem? Mr. Turner's poem turned out to be Invictus. As he read, all of us, even Royley, were absorbed by it. Mr. Turner concluded, "It matters not how strait the gate, how charged the punishments the scroll. I am the master of my fate. I am the captain of my soul." He clapped the book shut. I almost jumped out of my seat. In the hushed silence, it had been as loud as a rifle shot. "Now the cheerleaders will lead us in the school song," Mr. Turner ordered. The cheerleaders had been sitting together. They crept uncertainly on stage. They were down their uniforms. "Sing," Mr. Turner ordered them. "Everybody sing." On, green and white, the cheerleaders sang weakly, one looking at the other. The audience picked up the words, helping out. Soon the whole team was roaring. We are the right for the fight tonight. Hold that ball and hit that line. Every Big Creek star will shine. We'll fight, fight, fight for the green and white. When we were finished, there was applause and hoots of enthusiasm, almost as if We were cheering the team making a goal line stand. With nothing to really cheer about. The noise quickly died, and then there was a confused silence. Mr. Turner stepped from behind the lectern and nodded to our teachers, who stood up and began to shoo us out of the auditorium. "Well, now ain't that some shit," I heard Valentine say behind me as she made for the aisle. Roy Lee, like me, was too taken aback to say anything at all. The football boys gathered around their exalted coach, begging in vain for some reprieve. I looked for Dorothy and saw her with Emily Sue. Dorothy's cheeks were wet with tears. I wanted to go to her, but there were too many other kids in the way. By the time I made my way through them out of the auditorium, she had disappeared. As I exchanged my books from the locker, Buck came up and smashed his fist against his locker's metal door. "Damn it," he bellowed, and students stopped in their tracks, startled by his rage. Mr. Turner appeared instantly. Everyone but me and Buck fled the scene. I couldn't. He was standing in front of my open locker. "Mr. Trant, I hope you didn't dent your locker," Mr. Turner said, his voice cold as ice. "If you did, you will pay for its repair. And did I hear you curse? That I will not tolerate in my school, young man." Buck, huge and thick-browed, loomed over the little principal. "I'll never get a football scholarship now," he said, and his lower lip began to tremble, and a big tear welled up and dribbled down his fuzzy cheek. "It's the coal mines for me for the rest of my life. It just ain't fair." "Isn't fair, and you're correct." There was no fairness involved with this decision, only a petty sort of revenge. "Even so, there will be no such displays in my school." Buck frowned, his little eyes deeply puzzled. "But what will I do, Mr. Turner?" "Do? You will do, as we all do each day, our best with what God has given us. Now, if you are quite through with your sniveling, go to class." He leveled his hard little dark eyes at me. "And what are you doing or looking at, Mr. Bomb Builder?" "Not a thing." I reached around Buck, grabbed my books, and took off at a near trot. "No running in the hall," Mr. Turner called after me just as I turned a corner. Afternoon classes were subdued. Dorothy dabbed her eyes all through biology. When the bell rang, she gathered up her books and made for the door. I followed, but she was met just down the hall by Vernon Holbrook, a senior linebacker. Racked with sobs, she fell into his shoulder. He held her and then touched her cheek, wiping her tears away. Emily Sue walked up beside me and took it all in. "My, oh my," she said. I could hardly breathe. "Don't say anything," I managed to growl. "Wouldn't think of it," she said. "It speaks volumes all by itself. Listen, Emily Sue." I was about to give her both barrels, but she walked away, heading down the hall toward our next class. When I looked back, Dorothy and Vernon were gone too. In a sea of jostling students, I felt all alone. As soon as Jim hit the front door after school, gloom and anger descended on our house. He showed his displeasure by throwing his books on the living room floor and stomping up and down the steps and slamming doors and yelling at Dad the moment he got home from work for causing the debacle. "That's enough, Jimmy," Mom admonished him while Dad stood in stricken silence. "You've ruined everything," Jim whined. "I won't get a college scholarship now." "You'll go to college," Dad said evenly. "I'll pay your way through. Don't worry about that." "But I wanted to play college football. If I sit out my senior year, no college is going to pay any attention to me. I'll never forgive you, Dad." James Venable hiccup. "I said that's enough," Mom said, her tone of voice turning flat and hard. That was her warning tone. Jim opened his mouth and then clapped it shut, recognizing that Mom was on the edge. He stomped up the steps, making Daisy May jump out of his way and slammed his bedroom door shut. Later, while Dad retreated to the living room and Mom fumed in the kitchen, the football boys from Coalwood gathered in Jim's room, plotting futile anarchy. I had no sympathy for them. I wasn't even above stirring their pot just a little. I cracked open Jim's door and suggested with no little glee there might be room for them in the band. Jim sprang after me, and I ran back to my room and locked the door behind me. "You're dead, Sonny," I heard him say from the hall. A cold chill went up my spine. So solemnly was the statement made and confirmed by the cluster of huge muscled boys standing outside my door. It was as if somehow every bad thing that happened to them was now my fault. Gloom seemed to settle over Colwood. The fence line gossipers mostly agreed that my father had acted stupidly. A common thread to the talk that he had gotten too big for his britches again. Dad didn't deliver any lumber and tend to Cape Colwood, even though he had promised. After giving him a week, I decided to take direct action and went up to the mine carpenter shop to see Mr. McDuff. I entered the immaculate little shop, redolent of freshly sawn pine and oak, and found him working at a shrieking bandsaw. He shut it down, and I told him what Dad said I could have. He pushed his hand up under his white cloth cap and scratched his head. News to me, Sonny, but there's a pile of scrap lumber behind the shop. I guess it's okay for you to take. You'll have to go see Pharaoh for 10. How's your mom like her new fence? As far as I knew, she liked her resurrected rose garden fence just fine. It sure wasn't going anywhere. Mr. McDuff had built it back with posts as thick as telephone poles and cross beams that could have been used as headers in the mine. The scrap lumber he sent me to look at behind his shop proved to be a stack of beautiful tongue and groove pine boards. When I asked Mr. McDuff also slipped me a big box of nails. I called Odell, and a couple of hours later I heard the familiar rumble of the garbage truck pull to the shop. We loaded the boards and then headed for the big hangar-like machine shops run in neo-military fashion by Mr. Leon Pharaoh. Rows of laths, mills, shapers, and drill presses whined, ground, and hissed at us as Odell and I stepped inside. 20 men worked during the day shift, producing replacement parts for the mine machinery and fabricating a variety of ductwork and support structures. When I asked for Mr. Pharaoh, the man at the machines waved me to his office. Back to his office. A windowed cage overlooking the shop. Mr. Pharaoh leaned back in his chair, his hands clasped behind his head, and listened while I made my request for 10. Sonny, I had some until this morning, he replied amiably. But Junior Castle came by and got part of it for a doghouse, and Reverend Richard got the rest to patch the roof of this church. He leaned forward. Even if I had some, I don't give anything away out of this shop, even scrap. You want something? I like to trade. What you got? Nothing, I admitted. He shrugged. Well, there you go. Come back when you do. I decided to go and see Reverend Richard. We found him behind his church, pondering his little stack of 10. I wondered what he'd traded Mr. Pharaoh for it. The Reverend was dressed in a black suit and a black tie, as if he had just come from a funeral. His shoes were black and white, long and narrow. He was holding a straw Panama hat. Hi, boys, he said absently, and then saw it was me. Sonny boy, I sure missed the newspapers you gave me. I've missed your story, sir. Odell told him what we needed. Love to help you. I really would, he said, but I don't have enough for my roof as it is. I looked up, but your roof is shingled. He doubted. If I had shingles, I'd use them. But I don't. I've got 10. Emmett Jones has a bunch of shingles stacked up next to his coal box, Odell said. Almost the same color. Do tell, Little Richard said, suddenly interested. I reckon I'd be up for a swap if you could manage it. We were starting to figure out how to trade Colwood style. We found Mrs. Jones pushing a lawnmower. Emmett's at work, she said, eyeing the garbage truck, but if you'll bring me a load of good planting dirt, those old shingles are yours. The best planting dirt was down at Big Branch. We went by Odell's house, picked up 2 shovels and a pick, and kept going down past Cape Colwood to where the road turned back up into the mountains. Beside a mountain stream, Odell and I worked at a clear place, picking and shoveling rich black West Virginia loam into the truck. We were covered with dirt and sweat by the time we finished. Mrs. Jones was thrilled when we arrived with our load of dirt. Oh, my flowers are going to be glorious, she said, as if she could see them already. Just as the sun dropped below the western ridges, Odell dropped off our tent at the cape beside the lumber and the nails. The next morning, Quentin hitched over the mountains in time for breakfast. Mom made him eat an extra stack of pancakes. When he was done, he was so stuffed he could hardly walk. I raided the basement for hammers and saws and threw them in the back of Willie's wreck of a car. He picked up Sherman and Odell on the way. Odell had drawn up a plan for our blockhouse on a scrap of notebook paper. I'm not the carpenter or the carpenter's son, he chanted as we sawed and drove nails, but I'll do the carpenting until the carpenter comes. The sun beat down on us, the slack yard a cauldron of focused heat. The To keep our morale up, we sang with discordant enthusiasm. We went through the parts we could remember of Bebop-A-Lua, The Great Pretender, Blueberry Hill, and That'll Be the Day. If we didn't know all the words, we just repeated the ones we knew over and over again. Roy Lee had a good voice. With a sly eye in my direction, he gave us a solo rendition of the Everly Brothers' All I Have to Do Is Dream, with modified lyrics. Dream, dream, dream. All Sonny does is dream, dream, dream. When he wants Dorothy in his arms, when he wants her all her charms. Whenever he wants Dorothy, all he does is dream. Only trouble is, gee whiz, he's dreaming his life away. I laughed off Roy Lee's song, but it stung just the same. When we got too hot, we went to the muddy little creek that ran behind the slack dump and sat down on the rocks and let the cool water run over our feet. Quentin's so hot he was feeling dizzy, stretched out in the creek, and we left him and went back to work. We've got to have a launch pad too, Odell told us. Anybody ever pour concrete? I asked the group. I'm not the concrete pourer, the concrete pourer's son, came back the cheerful chorus of replies as Quentin, staggering a little, wandered up from the creek to join us, complaining that a crawdad had bitten him. I declared the day's work at an end. We were all pretty exhausted. When Mom saw Quentin, she admonished me for being heartless and cruel to the poor boy. She made him drink enough water to sink the Battleship Missouri, fed him cornbread and beans, and then sent him to sleep in my bed. I got some spare blankets out of the hall closet and bedded down on the living room couch for the night. Dad came in late and found me there. He switched on a lamp. Heard you've been writing my shops, he said. I peeked above the blankets. You said I could have scrap. I guess I did, he acknowledged absently, and then seemed to take note where I was. Why are you sleeping on the couch? We spent all day building our blockhouse, and Mom said Quentin was too tired to go home. He's sleeping in my bed. You've already got your blockhouse built? About halfway. You want to come see it? He yawned. Just remember your promise. No sight or sound of any rockets in Coalwood. Yes, sir, I replied glumly. If Jim was a member of the BCMA, I thought Dad would have been down there nailing boards with the rest of us. I saw Ike at the face today, he said, almost as an afterthought. He said something about teaching you to work around a machine shop. I said okay, as long as it was on his own time and no company materials. Mr. Bykowski had remembered. I grinned at Dad. Thank you, sir. My enthusiasm took him off guard. Don't get out of control now, he said. No, sir, I won't. No company supplies, he reiterated. You understand? You can use the machines, but you've got to buy your own aluminum and steel. I've got money from my newspaper route, I said, and I was still grinning. Dad looked at me with some confusion, almost as if he had never really looked at me before. Good night, little man, he said, finally switching off the lamp. Good night, sir, I replied happily. I cuddled back under my blankets and listened as he tiptoed up the steps. The living room was underneath my mother's bedroom. I heard the boards creaking beneath her feet as she crossed the room to her door. As Dad crept down the hall, there were a few moments of silence, and then I heard her walk back to her bed and the sound of her mattress taking her weight. I heard Dad's bedroom door close. I guess I was starting to grow up, because for the first time I understood at least a little about the loneliness and frustration that often seemed to fill our house. All right, that would be Chapter 8. You are to read Chapter 9, 10, 11, and 12. Yeah, so, all right, I'll see you guys later.